She gives us a nice little warning that that's happening. Yeah, we'll go ahead and get started then, I guess.
Well, welcome everybody. We are so happy to have you here as we're embarking in this brand new building. We've been getting to know your kiddos, and it has been so fun to see as your names trickle through, names that we recognize. And so to get to put to some of your faces with the kiddos that we're already getting to know is fun for us. So we're so grateful for you being here. I'm Janelle Wolfenden. I'm the school counselor. I have a master's degree in guidance and counseling. This is my 6th year in the district, and I'm also a mom of 4. So welcome, and we're so happy.
Yeah, and I'm Stephanie Terry. I'm the PBSES coach here at Cedar Trails, which I say that to people and they're like, what does that mean? So PBSES is a combination of positive behavior interventions and supports and social emotional supports. So basically how to be proactive in our support of students and how to make sure that we are helping them in their social emotional needs as well. So I have a master's degree in special education with behavior intervention as a focus. This is my 9th year in Issaquah. I taught kindergarten for a long time before coming to Cedar Trails. So we're really excited to share. And again, as you have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat box and we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end after we're done chatting. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. And Janelle, obviously feel free to jump in whenever as we're chatting this next part. Before we start, we were going to just share with you our Wolfpack pledge. This is what students say every morning as they are starting their day with their classroom teacher. These are our school-wide expectations. So they say, we are the Wolfpack. We are problem solvers who are accountable, courageous, and kind. And we share this with you just so you know kind of what students are being asked of at school. We go over with them each one of these expectations, what this looks like in the classroom, what it looks like in the bathroom, in the lunchroom, at music, at recess, what it means to be a problem solver, what it means to be courageous or accountable or kind. And we talk about those words with our kindergartners all the way through 5th graders. So it's kind of neat when you hear a kindergartner say like, oh, I was accountable for my coat today at recess or something like that. And yeah, we have these school-wide expectations. We try to use the same language in all of our classrooms and all parts of the school so that if a paraprofessional sees a student, they're using the same language that the teacher is using in the classroom. And we try to be clear and consistent with students about what these mean. So if your child is coming home and talking about being a problem solver or being accountable or courageous or kind, that means they're being part of our Wolfpack.
Another system that we use throughout the entire building is called the zones of regulation. And we utilize this as a way of helping students identify their emotions and categorize them. So in addition to knowing the verbiage around zones of regulation, they also know how to sign what zone they're in. So in our blue zone, they'll show me blue, which is blue for sign language. It's when they're sad or bored or tired or sick. When they're in their green zone, that's their ideal learning zone. It's when they're calm and happy. Their yellow zone is slightly higher energy, worried or frustrated. And their red zone is their biggest emotions. But it's amazing as we're walking down the hallway to have students in line signing to us what zone they're in. So I can tell they're in their blue zone or their yellow zone or their red zone just by them signing to us. So ask your students later on this evening what zone they're in and see if they can sign it to you, because it's been really neat. One way that this could be really helpful at home is in conversations. As a mom, my biggest frustration is getting home and being like, what'd you do today at school? And they always say nothing. What'd you learn? Nothing. So having an additional question that maybe they're not as likely to say nothing about is really nice. So one thing that I use with my student who is in our building with us is, what zones were you in today? And he'll stop and he'll think about it and he'll say, oh, I was in the yellow zone at recess because I was excited, or I was in my green zone in class. So I challenge you guys to, at some point, ask your kiddos what zones they were in today and see if they can identify some of those, because you might get some good stories.
It's really fun.
Some strategies that we talk a lot about in the building in association to the zones of regulation is strategies to getting back into the green zone. we don't want kids to ever feel like they're only ever supposed to be in the green zone. All the zones have their purpose, but the green zone is the ideal learning zone. And so we talk a lot about taking deep breaths, belly breaths. We talk about positive self-talk, using those kind words for ourselves. We talk about taking a break, and we talk about asking for help. So those are just a couple of the strategies that all of the kiddos in the building are being taught to utilize when they need help getting back into their green zone.
Yeah, so before I talk about this next slide, in relation to this next slide, one thing I wanted to mention at the beginning is that the reason we wanted to put on this family education night is because a lot of parents have reached out and said, how do I help my kiddo right now? They're having really big feelings. We're having a lot of meltdowns at home. Obviously, we are in a pandemic. We've been in kind of this collective trauma for the past year and a half, 2 years. And so we're all having big feelings. And so a big question has been like, how do I help my student right now? And so each one of these things, the zones, our common expectations, and then these next few things we're going to talk about are just ways that we support students at school when they are having big feelings. And so these are also ways that you can help at home as well. And so that's why when it says supporting an escalated child, we're talking about things that we do at school, but also things that you can do at home as a parent. And the very first place that we always start as staff members is checking in with ourselves first. You are, as a human being, oftentimes we pull in the emotions of the people around us. And so sometimes we are not in our what's called OPR, which is optimal performance range. Sometimes something happens and we get really frustrated, and it's really hard to support a child to help them calm down if we ourselves are not calmed down. So this image comes from something called right response training, which is a training on how to support children when they're in crisis. But I think it's something that I'm always like, I wish everybody knew about this. We often operate at our baseline. Our baseline might look different, but my baseline is my heart rate is kind of at a normal rate. I am at a regulated body temperature. I'm calm. I probably operate at a little bit higher anxiety than some people do at my baseline, but generally speaking, we all have a baseline where we start. And just like children, if a trigger is introduced, whether it's you're driving and someone slams on their brakes in front of you, or you get a phone call that is like really overwhelming, or maybe a child is yelling at you, when a trigger is introduced, our bodies go into this alarm stage, which is like our fight or flight stage, or freeze. For me, my heart rate starts to escalate. I get really sweaty. It's hard for me to think straight. That happens for kids when a trigger is introduced for them, and it happens for us as adults. So what we can do as adults is try to stay as much as we can at our baseline. That doesn't mean that we are ignoring every emotion that we are feeling, but that means that in the moment, in order to help a child calm down, we are trying to stay calm ourselves. And so you can go through the rest of this, where after you're through an alarm, you start to calm down, but before you are really calm, you kind of hit that exhaustion stage before you respond to your baseline. Meaning, I think a lot of us have gone through, when you have a real big event happen, we almost always crash at the end before we are back at our sort of everyday operating space. And so if your child is going into sort of an escalated state or having a really big feeling, the best way that we can support them is to try to stay at our baseline first. So before we even try to support our child, we check in with ourselves. As educators with a whole team of people, we are really lucky because we have an option to tap out and say, hey, I need someone else to support this because I am starting to find myself being pulled in. As a parent, you don't always have that option. Sometimes there's another person there to help you, sometimes there's not. But I would like to give you permission to, as long as the child is safe, to take a breath and take a moment to find your calm so that you can share it with your child if they are experiencing some overwhelm. With that, I wanted to share this. I'm not going to read this whole entire thing, but this is something called the escalation cycle. We look at as educators for our students, but this is something that happens with all people. We, like I said, operate at a baseline. Our baseline is the time where we are able to learn routines, problem solve, practice our everyday life. If something is introduced that puts us in to begin to get a little bit wound up, if you will, it is really hard for us to input new information or try to problem solve. And so that's the same with a kiddo. So if a child is starting to escalate, a lot of times we want to jump right to you get what you get and you don't throw a fit, or want to get right to you need to do this. This is your job right now. This is how we do things. We want to get straight to the teaching points. Sometimes we need to help students get back down to their calm before we can be teaching them. So we'll share this out so you can sit and read through this if you want to. But basically the reason I share this with you is because we are only problem solving, teaching, or practicing our routines when the child is at baseline. And when they're not at their sort of baseline calm, we're focusing on safety, we're focusing on prevention of more escalation, and we're focusing on redirection. So that might mean introducing something else to sort of distract the child and get them out of that escalated moment so that then they can get back to whatever it is that they need to be doing. So an example might be you're trying to get out the door. They're having a meltdown because they don't want to wear the shoes that they're supposed to be wearing today. Maybe in that moment, you crack a joke and it makes them giggle and they are able to find their baseline again. And then you can be like, okay, you need to put your shoes on because we need to go. Let's go. Sometimes laughter really helps students calm, or helps children calm down. That's the easiest example. There's obviously a lot bigger, more impactful moments, but as we focus on safety and prevention and redirection, that can really help minimize that escalation cycle. If a child is super escalated, we would call that they're in crisis. They are screaming, throwing things, having a tantrum. The best thing that we can do is not engage verbally. So showing verbal cues, pointing to what the expectation is, focusing on their safety. If we are engaging verbally, using 5 words or less, of 5 letters or less. So instead of saying, you really need to put your shoes on right now, we really need to get out the door, let's go, just saying shoes on, which sometimes that's enough to make you like, okay, they're not going to engage with me. It starts to help them calm down. Focusing on those really short phrases. First, then are also really helpful. So first shoes on, then something that is a preferred activity for them. Naming and that it's okay to have the big feeling that they're having, but it's not okay to be unsafe. So it's okay that you are feeling frustrated. It's not okay for you to be throwing your shoes at me. It's okay that you feel angry. It's not okay for you to hurt your sister. And it's okay for you as the adult to disengage with that as long as they're remaining safe. Janelle, do you want to add anything to that? If we go to the next slide.
I think we're ready to go to the next slide. And that kind of wrapped up our managing big emotions section. We threw a lot of information at you really quickly, and I would encourage you guys to, if you have follow-up questions or want more information, we have so much that we could share, to please reach out to either one of us, because we both have a lot of experience in helping kids manage big feelings, and we would love to share more. Next, we're going to go into our solving problems section. In this first one, I'm sharing a strategy and a resource that I utilize nearly on a daily basis to help kids manage conflict with each other. So I don't know if at any of your houses there's any conflict between siblings or friends, but it occurs here daily because they're still learning the social skills that are necessary to have friendships and navigate those dynamics. So this is a system that we use really frequently. If you would go ahead and show us the first one. So this is a 2-sided conversation that kids have with each other when they're trying to problem solve over all the topics. First, we're stating how we felt without blame when a certain event occurred. So this could look like, I felt really sad when you chose to play with so-and-so instead of me at recess. And then the other friend has the opportunity to say, well, I felt frustrated because I wanted to do this. Next, we reiterate what we've already heard. And I would also like to say, as I'm going through this, If any of you personally feel like sometimes your conversations with your friends don't go really well, these systems work beautifully for adults too. These are just some really solid communication for conflict resolution strategies. So next, we're just reiterating what the other person said. So what I heard you say is you were sad when I played with somebody else at recess, and it just helps that other individual feel heard. And it confirms that we're hearing it correctly. On an older student, this may look more like, what I hear you saying is, it really hurt your feelings when I said certain words. So it changes depending on the age, but it's always good to reiterate what it is that we've heard. The next one is coming up with some problem solving. So some ideas might be, I play with you at first recess, but I get to play with my other friends at second recess. And we're just coming up with those ideas and we're agreeing on something. So let's agree to. This is where we decide what our plan is going forward. If we need to apologize, this is an opportunity in this section to be able to do that. Sometimes feelings are hurt. I will say, I almost never force a kid to apologize because saying the words doesn't necessarily conjure the emotion, but I give them the door to be able to do it. Or if they don't have the right words, I might tell them what words sound appropriate in that moment. So I might say, when you said those words, it really hurt your friend. I wonder if your friend would feel really good if they heard you say, I'm sorry that I said those words that hurt you. And they may not repeat them, they may not be able to, but at least we start building the skill for them to be able to potentially do that later on. So after we've apologized, if necessary, we do something to finalize it. We shake hands, but it's COVID, so we don't actually shake hands, or we air high five, or we bump elbows, or whatever it is that feels like, all right, we're good, we're moving forward. And this system is something that once I teach it to a student once or twice, it is amazing how easily they adapt to utilizing it independently, especially for the kids that are second and third and fourth grade. So it truly is something that they pick up on really quickly, and it becomes a really easy conversation for them to have to be able to solve their own problems, which ultimately, what more do we want is our kids to be able to independently problem solve around certain things, especially with sibling dynamics or friendship dynamics.
Absolutely. So with that, we have a couple of pieces of a curriculum that we actually actively teach, a social emotional curriculum. In Issaquah, it's called Second Step. You've probably heard of it. A lot of times in teachers' newsletters, they will send home a blurb that says what they're working on that week. But Second Step from kindergarten all the way through fifth grade actively teaches problem-solving steps. With students, we know that they have to be at their baseline before they can start to problem solve. So we start by calming down. When I taught kindergarten, this was one of the very first things that we learned, how to calm down, because we can have big feelings. Having feelings is good and normal and valid. What we cannot do is act unsafely out of those feelings. So we teach our students to stop using whatever signal they used. In my classroom, it was their hand like this. Some teachers might teach them a different signal, but we stop what we're doing. We name our feeling. I am feeling angry that my friend played with someone else at recess. And then we use a strategy to calm down. Take some deep breaths, count forwards or backwards, using positive self-talk. So I am calm. I am having a big feeling, but I can be safe. And we teach students explicitly how to go through these calming down steps. When their body and their brain is feeling calm enough to be ready to problem solve, they can go through the peace walk like Janelle shared. They can also, all students in the building get these problem solving steps taught through their curriculum, and they have a poster in their classroom as well. So it's nice because it spells out step, so that helps us remember it. And it's very, very similar to the peace walk that Janelle just shared. But first, they say the problem without blame. And I think that is something that every person in the world, child or adult, myself included, could benefit from practicing, sharing what the problem is without putting blame. Both parties getting the opportunity to do that. Thinking of a solution. So Janelle shared 2 students or maybe siblings trying to problem solve. This might be, I hate writing and it's writing time. And so I'm having a problem. So the problem is it's writing time and writing is really hard. The next step is to start thinking of some solutions in a safe and respectful way. And I always tell students, you can come up with every possible solution, even if you don't think that it's possible, or even if you don't think that it's feasible, right? Like, solution would be just don't do my writing today. A solution might be ask the teacher for help. And then we kind of, sometimes I joke, the solution might be go running out of the classroom and say, I'm done with school, woohoo! Because that would probably solve your problem of the writing, but it might come with some other problems. But think of a variety of solutions, because the next step is exploring the consequences. What happens with each one of those solutions? Well, if I go running out of the classroom, I'm probably going to get in trouble. I'm probably going to run into a new problem. If I just don't do my writing, well, then I'll probably have to do it later anyways, and I might miss out on something that I really want to do. If I ask my teacher for help, what are the consequences of that? And they might be positive consequences. So my teacher might be able to help me. I might get my writing done in time. It might still be hard, but I wouldn't have to do it all by myself. And then the last step would be picking the best of those solutions. So the obvious one here would be to ask the adult for help and make your plan. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to raise my hand. I'm going to wait for the teacher to come over. I'm going to say to her, this is really hard. Can you please help me? And those 4 steps, they can go through each. That can be for writing. It can be for a problem on the playground. It can be for a variety of different things. And I'm going to, I think this has a little animation. Yeah. Really want to give a plug to read your teacher's newsletters, because the majority of their newsletters have the skills in their newsletter that they're working on this week in our social emotional curriculum. So it might be that they are learning these problem solving steps, or they might be working on active listening, which, you know, as an adult, as a parent, you might really want to, you know, learn the verbiage that they're learning too, so they can do that at home. They might be learning how to calm down. They might be learning just a variety of different social emotional skills. So take a peek at your teacher's newsletters each week and see if you can find the second step section to see what they're working on in that. I know a lot of times we want to jump to like, what are they learning in math? What are they learning in reading? And those are really, really important, but these are the skills that will help them be successful in those areas and in a lot of areas of life.
And I'm going to pop in. This is something that can truly be useful at home if you think about it in some of the problems that you might be encountering with your kiddos, whether it's they never seem to want to eat what you've made for dinner. Even going through the problem solving steps of like, what's the problem? The problem is you don't want to eat your food that I've made. What are some solutions? I just don't eat the food, or you make me something else, or I get to have candy. What are the consequences of that? So running through this and letting them be a part of the problem solving, and also really thinking through the entire impact. It's amazing how they can come to their own conclusions of what the right thing to do in those situations is, if you utilize this.
Yeah, and ultimately what we are hoping for our students is that they can grow into themselves as independent human beings, which our next section is all about independence. So that's perfect. Great segue. And so as we, as the adults, are willing to involve students in problem solving, they are growing those sort of muscles, if you will, so that they can be awesome adult humans someday when they get there. So that is kind of our solving problems section. We're going to transition into the growing independence side. But again, like Janelle said, I feel like at the end of each section, we're like, that was so much information. Please reach out as you have more questions, because it's a lot in a short period of time, but it's important. So we do want to talk about independence and growing independence. And I want to be clear as we're talking about this, I taught kindergarten for a long time. I have worked with a variety of grade levels. These are all things that are applicable to all grade levels. So if you're like, I don't know, this seems like something a 5th grader might be able to do, but a kindergartner probably can't, please reach out and ask, like, what are ways that you do this with a 5-year-old? What are ways that you do this with a 10-year-old? because it is possible. So as we're talking about independence, we want to think about when students are at school versus when students are at home. We know that as much as we want to be consistent, the expectations are going to differ between home and school. My favorite example is that in my household growing up, it was totally okay to be on the bottom floor in the basement and yell to mom, "Mom, I need your help." But at school, if I needed help, I could not just yell at my teacher, "Teacher, come help me." And so in one setting, it was perfectly appropriate for me to scream at the top of my lungs for an adult. In the other setting, it was not okay. And that is an element of like students having to switch between in which setting they are allowed to do certain things. So we know that is just that's just part of things, and that's okay, and that's good. But there are some ways that we can practice skills that they use at school, that we can practice those at home and continue to build them. And they might be really helpful at home. A really, really helpful and important tool is having students stop, look, and listen when you are talking to them or when they're talking to you. So, the whole like teachers clapping to get student attention or doing the different call and responses. That's because we know that students are engaging with us and hearing what we're saying when they're facing our direction. I am not saying that children need to stare you in the eyes while you are talking to them. We know that in different, whether it's different cultures or just different student like child comfort level, it may be more comfortable to look past you, but having them look in your general direction, stopping what they're doing, like pausing whatever it is they're doing, whether it's putting down blocks that they're playing with, putting down the paper they're writing or the book they're reading or the game that they're playing, stopping that, facing your direction to actively listen to the words that you're saying. It seems simple, but it is really, really impactful when they realize they have to stop what they're doing. And then having consistent and appropriate rewards and consequences for different behaviors. So knowing, a child knows that if I do this, then this is the consequence. So if I eat all of my dinner, the positive consequence might be I get to have dessert, just as an example. If I do not eat all my dinner, the consequence is that I'm hungry, probably. And not promising a consequence, whether positive or negative, that you can't follow through on. One example that I've used in the classroom before is like a teacher who says, well, if you don't finish this work on time, you can't go to recess, but then they still send the student to recess anyways. And I'm not an advocate of taking away recess personally. Children need to move, but not sort of threatening a consequence that you're not going to follow through on, whether it's a positive or negative one. So, oh, if you do this, then you're definitely going to we can definitely go to the park when you finish this task, but then not taking them to the park. That's kind of teaching them that, well, it's not going to happen, whether like, even though they're telling me it's going to happen. So being consistent in whatever those rewards or consequences are. Daily routines are really, really helpful at school. Children have routine. They get to school, their schedule is basically the same every day. They go to lunch at the same time. They have dinner, or they have not dinner at school, but they have recess at the same time. Obviously, in everyday life, it's a lot harder to have your day look exactly the same in the same routine every day. But certain routines, like in the morning, we know that we always brush our teeth, we always eat breakfast, and we always hug goodbye before you get on the bus. Or at nighttime, we always brush our teeth, put our PJs on, and read a story. Having routines that provide a sense of safety and a sense of structure so students know what to expect, and gives them a little bit of predictability. And all of this under the idea of independence, encouraging children to do things as much as they can on their own, not without adult support, but saying, oh, like, let me teach you how to zip up your jacket on your own. Oh, why don't you try first to zip it up? And if you still can't get it, then I can help you. Giving them as much opportunity as possible to take responsibility and be independent, because it empowers them and they feel really good about it. And it gives you opportunity as the adult to not have to constantly sort of be on them about certain things. And it just kind of like, they feel good about themselves. And we're not saying adultifying a child. Obviously, we still are going to help them with so many things. But whenever there's opportunity to give them a chance to do something on their own, consider letting them. I know sometimes you're like really trying to get out the door and it's like, I don't have time for them to try to zip up their jacket 17 times before we get out the door. But as much as you can take the time to let them practice. Yeah, and Janelle's going to add to that as well.
So I continuing the conversation of independence, I wanted to talk about a couple of things that are age appropriate chores for kids to do at home. This is something that I think is really hard to know. Like, is my kid the right age to do this chore? Do they have the ability? How to motivate kids to want to contribute to the family? If they're struggling with it, or if they do it wrong, do they get in trouble? And how many chores can they do? So this is just an example of age appropriate chores for kids broken down by age. There are many of these online. And really it's within your own household, what feels most appropriate. I have dogs. And so from the time that my kids are little, they're helping feed the dogs because it's something that they can do and it feels really good for them. One thing that it's really important to remember is as we're teaching our kids to do chores, and if they make a mistake or if they do it wrong, providing that opportunity to reteach as opposed to using it as a consequence for having done it wrong, because we want to assume that they did it wrong because they just don't know how to do it yet, not because they chose to. We also don't want them to hate doing chores because they feel like they get in trouble. So reminding ourselves as parents, which is really, really hard to do when they've made the same mistake 7 times, to provide the reteaching opportunity as opposed to the consequence. And also finding that motivation. At home, you can use a lot of the same tools that we use here in the building. So kids can earn stars, they can earn various little rewards for doing their jobs really, really well. And it doesn't have to be a toy or candy. It can be a special story or getting to watch, 10 minutes of YouTube snuggled up with you, or whatever it is in your house that is motivating to your child, but finding a way to get them to want to do these chores. And the reason we want this, the reason it's so, so important is our kids develop confidence when they are given the opportunity to learn new skills and to contribute to their family. As a parent, it is 100% harder to have my children do things with me. Those chores become infinitely harder, but the more that I can remind myself that it helps build up their confidence and helps create a connection to our home and the responsibility that exists within our home, the easier it is for me to remember that it's okay that it's going to take me 3 times as long to load the dishwasher when my 7-year-old helps me than it would otherwise. But that also translates into what they do at school. If they are used to having jobs at school, at home, they come to school and they're eager to also have jobs. They're eager to contribute to their community and they feel more connected to their community here at school and they like being at school more. So the more that we can encourage our kids to contribute in our homes, it really impacts their whole development. And that way, when they're 16 and 17 and 18 years old, or when they're going off to college, they have these skills, they have the confidence to be able to feel independent and do them on their own. And they're not standing there wondering how they're supposed to cook their top ramen or whatever it is that their college food is at that time. So it really has unbelievable benefits. It's not easy. I will fully acknowledge that, but it really does help a lot. And if you need any additional resources of ways that your kids can contribute at home, I'm happy to provide those too. Some additional ways that we wanted to talk about supporting your kids at home. Go ahead and Steffi, go all the way to the next. There we go. That will help them be independent at home, but then also help them a lot at school, are things like setting healthy parameters. And I would like to say, coming out of this last year and a half, all of us have survived to a certain extent. We were doing our jobs at home. We were also supporting our kids in their schooling in a way that we never have had to, as they're right next to us and they're trying to learn. Our social groups were kind of changed because we weren't able to go out and do the things that we were used to doing. There were so many ways that we were heavily impacted in the last year and a half. And as a result of that, a natural result of that, certain parameters, I think for many, many families dissipated a little bit. Whether it's access to technology increased significantly just so that we could get through our day. Bedtimes became a little bit wobbly as again, we were just trying to survive. Food expectations, what they're supposed to eat and how much they eat. All of these things kind of just became a little bit more lenient in a lot of homes because they had to for us to be able to get through this last year and a half. And now that we're starting to slowly creep back into slightly more normal schedules and activities, I feel like a lot of families are sitting here going, okay, so now we have way too much technology. Our kids are eating horribly, like it's chicken nuggets 3 times a week, and also not judging. And they're trying to decide where they can regain some of those parameters. And these are a couple of really good places. Their mental health and their physical health, starting with those priorities. So what foods do they need to be able to eat to feel good? How much technology is appropriate for my individual child? Because some kids can have more and some kids can have less, and it impacts them differently. So deciding as a family what parameters are really important to reinstate, or to start instating, because maybe it's just something that is your family starting now. And that is absolutely okay. So what parameters are a priority for your family? The next step is implementing them with consistency. And this is, I think, the hardest part of parenting, is deciding, okay, we're going to limit technology to X number of hours a day, and then actually sticking to it as our days ebb and flow, and we have tricky days and we have easier days. But making a decision and staying consistent to it. Another element of, I think, parenting that can be really tricky is when our kids are really struggling with something, which has happened a lot in the last year and a half, but also is just a part of growing up. We want to remove those barriers for our kids because we don't want them to feel uncomfortable. The challenge with that is that when we remove barriers, we take away an opportunity for our kids to become independent, to feel confident in themselves, and to develop the skills that will ultimately help them be successful teenagers and adults. So in lieu of removing barriers, find ways to provide support. If your kiddo is melting down and sad, give them the love and the support that they need to feel better, and then help them problem solve by accessing one of the strategies that we've talked about here, or one of the hundreds of other strategies that are available. Because our uncomfortable experiences truly do shape us. And if we remove anything that feels uncomfortable from our kids' lives, which is our natural instinct as parents, we are taking away some of those opportunities to grow. And what this can look like from the perspective of people who work with teenagers is a 16-year-old who has never dealt with their uncomfortable feelings, and now they're failing a class, or they have a friendship that's gone really, really sour, or they're stressed about college. And if they don't have the skills because we've removed all the barriers at that time, it's a much bigger problem. So giving them an opportunity to feel uncomfortable in those little problems that they have now helps them grow those skills. And then also just reevaluating our expectations for our kids and remembering that no isn't a bad word, and that it won't hurt them when we say it, and that it helps them feel safe in their environment by giving them safe parameters that they can exist in, and it increases their success in a lot of other areas.
Yeah, and just like we mentioned this briefly at the beginning, but the reason behind having this at parent education night or family education night was because families were reaching out saying, like, this has been a really hard couple of years and we need help. We're not sure how to support our students. And so I hope that what you hear in this is that, first of all, that you're not alone, but also that you know your child better than anyone else, and you are the best person for your child. And so these are all supports that we can provide to give them safety and to give them boundaries and to help them become the best versions of themselves. And you are the person who knows best how to implement these things for your kiddo. And yeah, I hope, and I'm not a parent, and so I recognize that me saying that is probably not super like, like, oh, awesome. But know that there are other people who are also feeling like, I need resources, I need help. And yeah, I hope we all give ourselves grace in surviving a really tough couple of years here. So, and loving our kids really well in that time. Which that is the end of our slides. But we would love to answer questions if you have any. The chat is open. If you have any questions that you'd like to send, you can send it to myself or to Janelle or to a place where it says everyone if you want it to be out there for everybody to see. We'll be here for the next few minutes, so feel free to drop those in the chat. If you are ready to move on in your evening, you are welcome to log off, but we are very, very thankful that you were here with us tonight, and we are going to put this recording on our school website in the next couple of days, so if you want to revisit it, feel free to do that. And a couple of questions are coming through, which is exciting. We had a question about the second step signs. I believe the step and the calm down, asking about where we can learn those and how we can, are they used outside of school at all? I believe we can share, I need to make sure curriculum wise that we can share, but we can definitely share those signs. Janelle, do you know if that's something that teachers can send home, like a copy of that so the parents can see, like can use that at home as well?
I haven't ever heard that there's limitations on that. I believe they're actually even available online, so I don't think that would be an issue. As Stephanie mentioned, we're going to be sharing out this PowerPoint with everybody that was registered. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So they're there, but then I think we could absolutely attach any signage that we used, the zones and the second step signs, and attach them as individual documents into that same email if that would be at all helpful.
Yeah. And as a note, are they used outside of school at all? Those zones of regulation are used in a lot of different like counseling services and things like that too. So you probably have seen that before, if you're wondering about that. Let's see. Oh, lots of messages coming through now. We will definitely share the presentation, Zoom recording to the emails that came through. Like Janelle just said, thank you.
Oh, you guys are very kind. Thank you so much. We love what we do. We love working with your kids so much. And if there's anything else that we can do, please genuinely reach out, because Steffi and I are both bursting with all these ideas and thoughts, and we've had so much training, and the opportunity to share them brings us so much joy. So please reach out.
Yeah. And you guys all have really cool kids. Your children are amazing. We're really thankful for the chance to get to work with them.
Consequences for inappropriate behavior. I'm trying to establish known consequences before the rise of pyramid begins. Is there any appropriate or best time when my little is starting to spiral to reiterate consequences? That is such a great question. Absolutely. Steffi, do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, sure. I love using both first then and also if then. So like if you hit your brother, then this is the consequence. So as a reminder, like, remember, if you do this, then this is the consequence. And also using first then. So like first you need to, put your shoes on, then you can grab your toy, depending on what the situation is. While teaching, while active teaching of routines, it needs to happen in the bottom of that pyramid part, it is perfectly okay as we are helping kiddos calm down to let them know, like, let's think about what the consequences are going to be. We know as adults that if someone is like threatening us while we are escalated, it's just going to escalate us more, but in a really calm and kind way, saying like, remember when this behavior happens, this is the consequence, and reiterating that I think is totally okay and appropriate. And also, depending on the behavior, and obviously this is very behavior dependent, sometimes actively ignoring whatever the behavior is can turn that behavior around before it gets to the point where it is unsafe or inappropriate. So like one example, and again, this is very minor, and so it might not be applicable, but like if they're just like poking, and they're really trying to get your attention, ignoring that and waiting until they do the appropriate behavior, even if it's just a semblance of the appropriate behavior. If they're poking you and you want them to say your name to get your attention, or say mom to get your attention, as soon as they stop poking you, thank you for keeping your hands to yourself. If you need something, you can say, Mom, can you please help me? But as far as particular consequences go, I think it is totally okay and appropriate to state in a like calm and kind way what the consequence will be of the behavior that you see starting to rise.
I would say only saying it a couple of times, because at some point a kiddo may need to just go through their escalation cycle. And that's as a parent when I choose to disengage and remind them, like, we can talk when you're calm. So for example, when my youngest was 4 and he went through this phase where he would get really, really angry at his toys and he would start throwing things and he would start being unsafe with his body, both for his toys, for the house, for himself, for the dogs, for anybody in the vicinity. There was no words that I could have said in that moment to calm him down. So removing him from that spot so that he wasn't unsafe and giving him a space to just have those feelings and letting him know that I'm there, but that we will talk when he's calm. It was amazing how quickly he learned that he was getting nothing that he wanted or needed out of the situation until his body was calm, and not engaging during that time of escalation because it wasn't ever productive. It only made me escalate.
And we know that when new systems are put into place, like new boundaries are set, we're going to have a rise in tricky behaviors before we see a drop in them. And so if that is like, if they're used to a problem being solved a certain way, and now we're trying something new, it might be that you have to go through that escalation cycle a couple of really hard times. But they will learn it. They will learn quickly. Like Janelle said, you know, what is the consequence of this behavior, whether it is a positive or a negative one.
Absolutely. Could you talk a little bit more about not removing barriers that are prohibiting a child from completing work while still letting them go through it so they can learn to deal with it? I often try to quickly de-escalate when I feel my daughter getting anxious about something before she reaches the apex of crisis. Ultimately, I would like for her to learn how to manage her own feelings, but she'll never get her work done if she keeps having meltdowns. That is such a great question. I just want to make sure that I glance over it again so to make sure that we're answering it appropriately. When we're talking about anxious feelings, it's really, really tricky because it is such a barrier to accessing what you need to be able to do. And so learning strategies to address your anxiety prior to trying to complete a task is the only way to be able to get to the point where you're completing it. But if the task keeps re-escalating you in your anxiety, it can be really debilitating. Let me just reread this real quick. Steffi, what?
Yeah, so this might be, I am someone who struggled with anxiety a lot as a child, a lot, like full panic attacks, full anxiety attacks. And it is absolutely really important to learn the skills in the moment so that you can engage with the task at hand. And a lot of times it is the task that's causing the anxiety. And so I think when we're talking about removing barriers, we're not saying like, go ahead, go through your whole, have your full anxiety attack, whatever, but we are also saying, helping them through their own management. So instead of saying, oh, you don't have to do it, I'll do it for you, or you don't have to do it, we'll just forget about this, saying, okay, naming this task is causing you a lot of anxiety right now. That is okay, that it is making you feel that way. That is a normal feeling. Here is a strategy to help you. Let's practice. And kids roll their eyes at me sometimes. I'm like, let's practice our deep breaths. And as the adult, when we start breathing deep, children start to mirror our breaths. And then we have a biological response in our body that starts to calm down. So you almost feel a little bit silly because you're literally sitting there going, and it doesn't have to be quite so pronounced, but you are modeling calm breaths, and their body will start to mirror yours. And then you can say, wow, I noticed how you calmed your body down. Are you ready for this task yet? Or do we still need to do some like another activity to help our body calm down? There's different strategies that we can share. One of them being like grounding exercises. So like name 5 things that you can see around you right now. Name 4 things that you can hear, you go through your senses, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. One thing that you can smell. I can't remember exactly the order, but in those moments of crisis or anxiety, it is okay for them to go through that cycle. And we can also give them strategies to manage their feelings while they're going through it. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think I absolutely agree with what you said. I think that having strategies in our back pocket that we already know that we've been taught while we're calm, that help us that we can access when we start to feel anxiety, because anxiety it's a chemical process happening in the brain. It's a physiological response to something that's making us uncomfortable. So if we can work some of those chemicals out of our brain, then we're able to access what we need to be able to. And it also helps if you can chunk the assignments into smaller things and be like, okay, you're going to do this math problem, and then you're going to get up and you're going to get a drink of water, or you're going to get to have 2 minutes. So accessing some of that motivational piece in their head can overshadow some of the anxiety in certain situations. So finding the tips and tricks that work for that kiddo is really the key to be able to help support them so that they can be more independent. But they definitely need strategies. And that is another thing. We have a whole slew of strategies that if at any point somebody wants to have an individual conversation around specific strategies for their student, we would be happy to support them.
Yeah. And I have to say, for me personally, and this might have just been me, the biggest help when I was having the biggest thing that changed the way that I was able to respond was someone giving me permission to have anxiety or to have that moment. Like when the moment someone said to me, "You are allowed to be feeling this way," I just melted. It was the first time I had heard that. And I still felt anxious, but it reduced the amount of time that I was kind of in that crisis cycle, because I realized like there wasn't shame attached to it. It was a normal response that my body was having. And then I could use those strategies that we learned to help my body respond in a different way. So I think removing shame is a huge piece for any of these things as well. I also,
and one thing that we talk a lot about in this building is behavior is communication. And so viewing your child's behaviors as them asking for something or needing something or having an unmet something or other. But behavior is always a way of communicating. Sometimes the way they choose to communicate that makes us feel extremely uncomfortable as parents, especially if it looks like defiance or them not doing their job or anything like that. It triggers something in us, but it's always communication. And the more we can remember that, the better. I'm also going to add to our list of things that we'll email out are those grounding exercises. So we'll attach that to the email that goes out. And Kelly, I enjoy that you shared this. Thank you so much for the coming up with consequences as a family for certain behaviors that were a problem in the household. And so that they had buy-in to that system. And that also works for rewards too. Like if you do this, what's an appropriate reward? And it helps them have buy-in. So I think that's amazing. And thank you so much for sharing that with us.
I had another question that came through in a private chat. Suggestions for encouraging a child to keep their body still. While I know for certain that my kid sits so well in class, when she does reading or work at home, she's super squirmy, which distracts me and probably is not letting her brain work. And I love this question because I think as a teacher, I was taught many, many years that in order for students to learn, they need to sit still. And whenever kids would move around, it would be really distracting to me, kind of like they mentioned in this question. And so someone recently told me what did they say? Like learning is messy, and also like, it's okay for students to move. Obviously they need to be able to focus on what they're doing. And as you said, they sit so well in class. They're sitting all day long at school. I wish they weren't. And I know teachers incorporate movement breaks and teachers incorporate, we have recess and things, but they're sitting for so long at school. I would encourage as much opportunity to get up and move as possible, recognizing that they might also have homework. They have other things they need to work on. And so my biggest suggestion, and I'll let Janelle jump in, is if they have to sit down and do things, if they have to sit down and sit still for a task that they have to do, having it be short amounts of time, that if they do, and Janelle kind of touched on this earlier, if they do one math problem, then they get to get up and they have a 2-minute dance break or movement break or whatever is motivating to move their body. And then they get to come back and do the next 2 problems. And after that, they get to get up and move again, giving them as much opportunity to move, because it's totally appropriate for their bodies to be moving.
I think you'll actually, I was worried when I heard this question. I was like, oh, I worry that the parent isn't going to love my answer, because we are actually creating more opportunities for students to move within the classroom because there's significant data that shows that if they aren't trying to focus on sitting still, they're focusing more on their work and they actually produce better work and have greater access to their education. So I'm so sorry to tell you that we are actually working actively to provide your kids opportunities to move within the classroom. We have wiggle seats, we have special pads that go on the seats, we have foot bands, we have lots of ways for them to move because it actually increases their access to the content that we're teaching and helps them learn it a little bit more easily. As a parent, it is super annoying when your kid will not sit still or when they're constantly making noise. And so I absolutely understand that frustration. And sometimes it's a matter of giving them a space that's separate of where I am so that they can move their body and not annoy me because I get really sensitive to sounds and to movement. So if I need them to do something and they can't sit still, then I usually provide them a different opportunity to be in a different room so that they can do that separate of me and not make me want to pull my hair out.
I'm really excited about the next question because it says, is there a risk of having too much reward tied to daily tasks? And I'm so excited to tell you that there's so much research that says, no, there's not a risk to having too much reward. If you are interested, you can reach out to us and we can share the research with you, but there is lots of research that shows that external rewards are not negatively impactful to internal motivation. And as adults, we reward ourselves constantly. We get paid to do our work. I give myself chocolate after parent nights. we give ourselves rewards. And so I get excited to share that because it's a big fear that we have. They're never going to learn to do it on their own. Research shows that there is not a negative impact on that.
And what it does do is it creates positive associations to those tasks. So you please go unload the dishwasher. When you do, there's this reward that you're looking forward to. They're thinking about the reward, they're doing the job, they're practicing the skill, and they're excited about it, which just increases their motivation to do it again. And I love your responses. Yay, it makes sense. Woohoo, I thought I was ruining her.
Yay.
I love that question.
Me too. Yay, well, we're right at 6 o'clock. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate this time. Your questions were really awesome. We'll send out an email with those resources. The recording will be in that email along with a PowerPoint, but we'll also put a recording of tonight on our school website. So if you have other people who are interested, they can access it that way as well. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Bye. Now I have to figure out how to stop this.